everyone. This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box podcast, brought to you by Historical Conquest. It's a game that's really fun, and it can also be educational. It does not have to be both, but it can be both because it's fun and it's about history. Now, what it is it's basically a game much like the game of Risk, where you're trying to take over the world. But here you start off with one land and you defend it with people from history, including people all over the place, all found on their own individual cards, much like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic has a lot of the gameplay of that, but most of the gameplay of Risk merged together to be a really fun game of conquering the world and just having fun with it. You can also, because a world domination game, a military type game, they don't really have a need for like authors, musicians, artists, and such. We actually created a second way of winning. There's two ways. First off, it's world domination. Second off, it's called increasing your morale to 3,000 points. Morale points. Morale points is basically how happy your people are. And if you get up to 3,000 points, you win the game. Who gives you those? The people that are not usually in a military type game. Authors, musicians, actors, activists, inventors, and so on and so forth. It's because of these people that your morale increases enough so that the people will actually fight with you, because until you get to 800 morale, they won't fight with you. And then if you get to 3,000, you win the game. You can't actually go negative, which means, again, the people don't like you. They will not fight for you, and you're just hurting yourself. So you want to find ways of getting your morale up, and at the same time, defending your lands and attacking your opponent, trying to steal their lands from them. That's it. That's Historical Conquest in a nutshell. Okay, now what Historical Conquest is doing now is putting together a podcast for you to be able to enjoy history Monday through Thursdays. Mondays and Wednesdays, we have American history. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have ancient civilizations. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mixture of both, but it's because we have two curriculums being written at the same time, and we're trying to get this out mostly for those that buy into our curriculum. It's a monthly box called the Adventure Box, which is why this is called the Adventure Box Podcast. Every month you get something on the door that has crafts, it has books, it has games, it has all these different things. So that's the great value. And it also comes with like Zogos, our online sister company platform. Educational games made for between 5 years old and 19 years old. So there's more information on that. We'll give it to you later. But as of right now, again, Mondays, Wednesdays, American history. So today we're going to be talking to you about what? American history. And what are we going to be talking about? The melting pot. Now, I want to tell you a little bit from something I learned on, I think it was like Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. I had someone, maybe it's a little bit later, who watched one of our videos. And they said, you don't have any idea what the melting pot phrase was even about. And I was like, I don't. Okay, let me tell you what I know it's about. So, it was a play. The Melting Pot is an actual play that was put out during the time of immigration, during early immigration. And it was about immigration, but even more, not just in the play, but the author's writings before, it was about what made America, America. So, the first week, I don't know why, we just ordered it this way. We focused on African Americans. We focused on Africans coming over, immigrating, not basically by force, immigrating to the United States and being put into slavery. We focused that on the first week. The second week, we talked about the indigenous people, those that were already here. Why did we do those ones first? Maybe because they're most controversial. I mean, whether it was slavery and forcing people to come to the United States or forcing people out of the land that they were at. Maybe it's because it was controversial. I don't know. It was just the way I thought it should be actually ordered. There was actually 4 different subjects. Native African Americans or Africans, the indigenous, which again, what's in their name? You have African Americans, you have Native Americans or indigenous Americans, however you want to say it, but same thing. Those things, we always focus on the first word. Though maybe because names are important, words are important, we need to be focusing on the second word, Americans. Doesn't matter if you come from Africa. It doesn't matter if you come from Asia. Polynesians. I said Asia. Europe. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where you come from. We here in the United States, if you're a citizen, are all Americans. Now, we all have separate subcultures, but we have one culture that's been designed over time, which is why it's called the melting pot. Early in American history, we all came together. We created this culture. There was no culture here because, again, you had the Native Americans. Their culture would have been the culture that was here. Just because you bring in cultures doesn't mean that's the one culture that's supposed to be. We created a melting pot. We melded all of our cultures together so that we can actually create a core belief here in the United States. And so week 3, what are we talking about? The religious. So we don't call them the religious Americans. We just call them the religious. Those that are religious actually are one of the biggest building blocks in the United States. Now, interesting. Some like to say, well, this is a melting pot of all beliefs and such. Yes, it is. It totally is. But what was it built on? You have, what were our laws built on? Here, I'll say it, and this is controversial, but Judeo-Christian beliefs. Judeo, Jew, Israel. Christian, no boundaries. Christian beliefs. Actually, also Israel, but break off from there. Those were where the basic core beliefs, the melting pot, came from. But at the same time, we've had Muslim, we've had Buddhist, we've had Hinduism, we've had all these different groups come together. So today we're going to be talking about something that's very important. And then the last week, we'll actually talk about immigration and what was happening back at that time. So stay tuned for that next week. This week, let's talk about the very important part of the religious and where they came from. And why is it so important here in the United States today? Even if you're not religious, it is 1, good to know, and 2, good to understand. So today we're diving into a powerful topic, how religion laid the spiritual and cultural foundation of colonial America. Let's put it another way, how a wave of rival groups created what was called the First Great Awakening, which swept through the Atlantic Ocean and into the United States from Europe. One more. Let's talk about how faith helped inspire a revolution. All these things we're going to be talking about today. So from earliest settlers escaping persecution in Europe to the fiery preachers calling for, heartfelt faith, wanting everyone to be able to feel what they believe. Again, it was Christian, but it goes out to basically everyone. And to sermons that stirred a lot of power towards liberty. Religion was never just a private matter in colonial life. So that's an interesting thing. A lot of us, focus on making it a personal thing where it's private. And I'm not saying me, I'm just saying a lot of people. We want to keep it private. We don't want to have it shared with others. That's these days. Back then, everyone shared in some sort of belief. Whether it was agnostic, atheist, or Christian, or Muslim, they all shared their belief because this is what created the culture. And eventually, the fight for independence. So there's 3 things we're going to be talking about today. Religious foundation in colonial America, the First Great Awakening, and how religion stirred up basically the American Revolution. So let's begin. Let's go back. Not too far back, not like ancient times. We're going to go back into probably about 400 years ago, or somewhere around there, maybe 500 years ago, when the first Europeans sought a new world for their faith. Not just seeking a new world, but seeking one for their new faith. Around the 1500s. Actually, more like the 1600s. But when we think of colonial America, we often think of what? Pilgrims, right? Powdered wigs, maybe even triangular hats. Yes, triangular hats. The total fad during at that time. I mean, everyone loved it. It was fabulous. Triangular hats. And the powder wigs. I mean, you got to look pretty distinguished. It's because a lot of their hairs were very messy. They wanted to put it on something and be done with it. A lot of perfume in that hair. Why? Because he couldn't wash these wigs. I mean, talk about lice and everything else. Holy cow. Not something we will ever want to go back to. But faith itself was central to the story of many of these early communities. In fact, religion was one of the key reasons people came to the New World. Let's talk about a few of these. Let's talk about the quest for religious freedoms. Okay, in 1620, the Pilgrims, separatists basically from the Church of England, they did not believe in the Church of England. They did not believe in the Catholic, well, some did, but the Pilgrims did not believe in the Catholic belief. They were seeking freedom from religious persecution in England. The Americas were basically newly established. Not even established, newly discovered. And they were constantly sending people over just to map it out. Well, when the Pilgrims came over in 1630 or so, around that, Pilgrims came over in 1630 from the Church of England and settled Plymouth. Sorry, I went off on the second part. Again, they were seeking religious freedom. In 1830, you had the Puritans who came over and established Massachusetts Bay, not just to escape, but to build city upon a hill, something from the Bible, a godly society to shine as an example to everyone. Now, you had, again, the Pilgrims, you had the Puritans. Later on, you also had the Quakers, who basically founded, with the help of William Penn, Pennsylvania. You got to read the curriculum. You're going to get a huge story on William Penn. And actually, all of these groups, you're going to get a lot on each of them in the Melting Pot curriculum. So you read it up. It's great. You're also going to have the Catholics who come over because they were persecuted as well in certain areas. So they came over to Maryland and started up Maryland. You had the Baptists and Methodists who established a lot of the South. So each colony had different views on religious tolerance. For example, I'll give you one, Rhode Island, founded by Roger Williams, which actually, go a little bit more into it, you'll get into the text, it was not Roger Williams, it was a woman. What was her name? You're going to have to look in the text. Okay, but he had some very controversial and radical religious beliefs at the time, such as women could actually talk in church. Again, not him exactly, it was his followers, but you're going to have to look her up. I'm not going to do it all for you. It's a great story for you. Okay, so let's talk about faith in colonial law. So you had faith that established all these colonies, but they all had laws. So let's talk about the laws. Okay, so in many colonies, religion was deeply tied to civil government. So church and state, they were basically tied together. Again, like the Catholics were in Maryland, they eventually tried to have it so Catholicism was the major church in the area. A lot of other Christian denominations tried to do the same thing. There were others that wanted complete separation. So church attendance was often expected or even required, and taxes basically funded the churches in the area. So again, totally different than what they do today. You can't get government funds if you're religion, except if you're an NGO trying to help other people, but we're not going to go there. That's a totally different story. So the Bible was central to daily life and education and moral values in most of the colonies. But even as faith bound communities, they kept people together, it also raised many questions, such as how should churches and governments interact? Where should be the divide? Who should interpret scriptures and for the church or for individuals, for their rights? There's a ton of other questions. You could probably think of them yourself. Like, in other words, how do you work between colonies if there's two different religions and they have two different sets of rules? So these questions set the stage for a major change. Major change. What was it called? The First Great Awakening. By the early 1700s, colonial churches had become formal, structured, and they had a lot of ties into everything that was happening in the colonies. So some felt spiritually cold at this point. I mean, if the government's forcing you to church, you're going to feel spiritually cold. If everyone else around you is thinking one way and you're not, you're going to feel spiritually cold. But just as people began to seeking deeper meaning, a spark, a revival was lit. And it swept through Europe and America. So again, this was not just in the colonies, but also happening in Europe. Now let's talk about Europe first. The awakening begins in Europe. Okay, it started with a revival movement basically in England and Germany, led by a man. You may know actually a few of these. John Wesley. I mean, we have a few of these in our animations on YouTube. We have them in our books. We have them in our cards. So, and again, we're secular because we go in public schools and everything like that. But these are people that are prevalent in history, and so you need to learn them. John Wesley, Charles Wesley, and one that I knew fairly well from history, George Whitefield. So let's go through each of them. John Wesley would go on to found the Methodist Church. He emphasized personal holiness and emotional, heartfelt faith. So this is something that was very strong to him. In the Methodist, they preached, they emphasized repentance, a personal relationship with God, and the ideas that salvation was for all, not just the elite, which was a little bit different than what they were teaching over in Europe. I mean, some of the things from Europe came over to the United States, but mostly what they were teaching in Europe, which is why they had issues over there. Now, John Wesley was mostly in Europe. Let's go into the influence that was in the U.S. In the Americas, sorry, not the U.S. It was not the U.S. at the time. The awakening reached America. The revival spread throughout the American colonies between 1730 and 1740s, 1750, we'll say. And it became known as the First Great Awakening. So I mentioned two other figures that were very important. So not just John Wesley, but there was also a Jonathan Edwards. Oh, I didn't mention him at first. I should have mentioned him. So John Wesley, Charles Wesley, they were in Europe. John Edwards. So, yeah, you remember my name, Zach Edwards, but not a relation. Sorry. My family actually came over in the Mayflower and settled the New England, Long Island area. John Edwards was a preacher who was known for famous sermons such as Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. He was very much about emotion, getting people riled up and ready to go. Remember what I said? A lot of people felt spiritually cold. When you go to a revival and you get heated up, you're not spiritually cold anymore. You're ready to rock. Okay, then you had George Whitefield. He was an English preacher who drew thousands to open sermons. Yes, the first outside revivals. They didn't have enough room inside of small churches for these open gatherings. And no, there was so many others. But these were two of the main ones that really started up the First Great Awakening in the United States. And I say the first because we're going to be talking about it on Wednesday, the Second Great Awakening. Now, people experienced spiritual renewal in many different ways. They experienced it through emotional preaching. New denominations. They went out and started up new denominations, like the Baptists, the Methodists, all starting in Europe, but coming to the United States. Methodists, again, we talked about that, came over to the United States. Baptists is the same thing. They came over. The awakening, the awakening culture changed at this point. It weakened the power of the state churches and encouraged individualism and faith. So that's interesting. So remember printing press. Let's go back to the printing press. The Renaissance. The printing press, what did it do? It gave the opportunity, or opportunity to create what? The Bible in English and other languages. Well, same thing happened here. You had so many different denominations because people were actually reading the Bible, and so created individual churches, different denominations. State churches lost their power as much. So ordinary people began to believe they could interpret the Bible for themselves. It also challenged traditional authorities, planted a seed of democracy. That's right, democratic thinking and personal liberties. Wait a second. What does that sound like? Wait a minute. It sounds like the American Revolution. So let's talk about that. As conflicts brewed between British in the mid 1700s and the religion and those are the colonies. I was going to say the religious, but the colonists, religion continued to be more than just a personal belief. It was a powerful force for shaping revolutionary ideas. A lot of the people who started the American Revolution actually came from their Christian beliefs and their individual liberties. So many ministers, especially in New England, basically began to preach about liberty. There was a group. Now, you might have heard this before. They were called the Black Robe Regiment. Preachers who supported the revolutionary cause. They cited scriptures and argued against the tyranny of England as a sin. God gave, there's another one, God gave people rights that government must not violate their rights, their personal rights. So God gave people rights that governments must not violate. How about religion against unjust rulers was sometimes necessary. Now these are actual quotes, partial quotes from all these people. Sermons were filled with phrases such as liberty as a gift from God. And even the Declaration of Independence reflected these religious undertones. Now, there was actually biblical justification for freedom, and this is how they fought for it. So first off, revolutionaries often used biblical imagery comparing Britain to the pharaohs and America to Israel and the escaping of slavery. Pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense, though it was secular in tone, borrowed from the religious language and appealed to the common people. Churches became meeting places for patriots, and many clergy even began to join the fight. When we go to the when you go back to the American Revolution, that textbook, you're going to see a lot of that there. So when Americans fought for freedom, they believed they were doing God's will. That's what started the American Revolution. And there's a lot more. So some Anglicans, Church of England, remained loyal to the British during the American Revolution. Others, like the Quakers, opposed war entirely due to their pacifist beliefs, and so decided not to do anything. But overall, religion helped inspire a sense of moral purpose behind the revolution. Okay, so really quick, let's sum this up. Okay, so religion in colonial America was never just about personal faith. It built communities, inspired revivals, and ultimately helped spark a revolution. Early settlers came to worship freely to the United States, to create their own societies and religious centers, and their laws based on that, and even their lives based on that. The first Great Awakening was because there was a lot of dissatisfaction with what that actually created. It spread spiritual revivals throughout the colonies, including the thoughts of liberty and equality. And when the people came to break from the British, faith played a key role. And so many of those that were in the pulpits or on the battlefield all were stirred up by this time period. Even today, we see that this echoes in the movements, in the ways of understanding freedom, consciousness, and also the role of faith in public life. Now, I got a action question for you, as I always do. To you, I want to know, put them in the comments below, What role do you think religion, any religion, but religion should play in public life today? What are your thoughts? Share that. This is very controversial in some sense. Make your voice heard of what you believe is the reasoning for it. Now, if people put in derogatory things in the comments, I will remove them. So voice what you think. I will not allow anyone to make derogatory comments towards your beliefs. So please put them in there. At the same time, if you're going to be bigoted or any kind of hateful speech in there, I will ultimately remove that right away. So please be civil in what you say. Share your thoughts and your beliefs. Don't just try to stir the pot. Thanks so much for joining us. We will catch you tomorrow as we talk about ancient Greece. So thanks again for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.